Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. This is the show where we discuss everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers. That's exactly what we plan on doing today. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, and I'm joined at this time by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing tonight?
Maxwell, I'm doing awesome. It's a big football day again. The fun part about recording on Sundays during football season, but glad to be hanging out with you. Glad for everybody who's taken some time to come listen to what should be a fun show, dude. I'm very excited about our lineup. How's your weekend been?
It was good until I hold this up for the camera. I horrifically sliced my thumb.
Yikes.
It's a Band-Aid. I got a Band-Aid on it. It's fine.
Okay.
Cutting some onions today. No, it was the green peppers. I was making jambalaya. Got to the green peppers.
Oh, dude, nice.
Brutal. The jambalaya turned out fine. I did not get blood on any of the food. But okay. One of the worst cuts I've ever had in my entire life. So up until then, it was good. The Eagles won. I like the Eagles. Go Birds. That was fun.
I wanted the Commanders to win.
Yeah, it would have been fun. The Jane Daniels experience was a blast. But we've got like 12 more years of that. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm happy for Saquon.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
love that. But yeah, that's been my weekend.
Okay.
Let's talk ball though. I'm excited to talk ball. We're gonna jump into it. So the format for I think probably going forward for a little bit is we're gonna kind of focus on a big name up top, some guys that we've been focused on in the middle, and then sleepers at the end. We are leading off with one of the most highly touted prospects in this class. He is Kasparas Jakucionis at Illinois. He is 19, a freshman. And he is a dazzling playmaker who is stuffing the stat sheet. So on the year, the 6'5", 6'6" guard is where he's listed. 16.2 points per game on 48.5% from the field, 38.6% from three, and 87.8% at the free throw line. He's also averaging 5.2 rebounds per game, 5.4 assists to 3.6 turnovers, 1.1 steals and 0.1 blocks. Jakucionis was a guy who came into the year with a lot of buzz, was sort of a consensus, like conservatively, a consensus lottery guy. I think it would be safe to say consensus top 20, consensus lottery in that sort of range. Really blew up, came out of the gate storming. He's hit a bit of a bumpy road in conference play in just kind of the last few games in general, I would say, but overall still very good, very efficient. Let's kind of get into meat and potatoes. What's been your journey with him as a prospect is how I like to put it. Coming into the year, what were your opinions of him?
Pretty low, I would say, relative to consensus. I mean, I'm not like wasn't in my top 60 or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I liked him better than Jalil Bethea from Miami. I'll put it that way. But yeah, he was kind of a hard read for me. I was curious to see how he was going to do in college relative to European style of play. That's always like one of the big things that we hear about whenever we get these international prospects is that there's like a little bit of an acclimation period. And Kasparas didn't really have that, like you alluded to. He kind of came out just like ready to go. And I feel like now he's kind of starting to hit it, but I feel like he's been so productive early that his kind of adaptation to basketball, especially like in the thick of conference play, I feel like he's learned so much like leading up to this point that even though he's still kind of feeling out the game, he's still allowed to be productive in like a very, good way, beneficial way for Illinois while he's still kind of feeling things out. We'll touch on some of the things that I'm sure that we have concerns on like as we continue with this show, but there's a lot to be excited about. I get why there is buzz, but I don't know how you feel about this, Maxwell. Like there are people, you might be one of them, who have him like in that top 5 range.
Yeah,
and
I do.
I'm not there, so this should be a fun conversation. I will say I have him all the way down at like 7 or 8. So,
yeah.
Like way back there. I'm super out on him, but I'm just not there as like a top 5 guy.
For sure. Well, look, we were talking about this the other day. I think we're both trying to make a point of being as fluid as we can in our evaluation process this year and like not really being like married to rankings even at this point in the process. Like it's one thing to be like, yeah, I really like this guy, or like based on the productivity, I don't see him falling past a certain point. But I think we've learned enough in recent years of like, well, this guy's consensus here, so I got to keep him here, to be like, well, maybe that's not the smartest way to go. And I think that's something we're both kind of keeping in mind. So with Kasparas, I liked the preseason tape a lot. Like I was just really interested in him. I liked how the shot looked a lot, which was the biggest thing for me. I still like considering how he was going to hold up defensively. I would say was the big thing, but I was pretty bought in on the offense as a whole. I sort of continue to be bought in to the offense as a whole. So the big thing with him is we're talking like playmaker, and I wouldn't use the phrase jumbo playmaker with him because like he's not that big. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like the height that a lot of guards are now, the length a lot of guards are now, and he's not particularly strong, right? Like he's not a guy that is, built like James Harden and gonna, punish a guy on the block if that's what the situation calls for, or hold his own on a post up. Like that's just not his game. He's just sort of a guard. I adore his pull-up game, and I really like how he uses his feet to create separation for himself, gain distance from defenders, his balance, how quick he is going into those moves to generate space, whether it's sideways, stepping back. Like he's really good at separating on the perimeter and getting off a shot. He's making 38.3% of his pull-up threes, and he's taken 60 of them this year. So that's like a go-to thing for him. He's a guy that if teams are going to have to be really careful about how they play ball screen coverages. If you're in a deep drop, he's going to punish that. If a guy, goes too far under, he can take advantage. And he's also just kind of shown bailout shot making chops. If he has to just get a bucket late in the clock, he can be that dude. And I think that goes a long way. He's also finished really well this year, is the other thing. So 33.1% of his shots in the half court at the rim. He's made 66% of those. Really good touch inside. Really crafty about finding rim angles. The one knock I've seen on him a lot is that he is like way more go left than go right. Like he rarely goes right. I get that. I think that's a completely reasonable thing to be worried about. Like why is the guard only like going in one direction? Where I'll give him kudos there is that he's started to go right more consistently, and he's had some nice buckets going right in the last few games. So I do think that that's something that can come along. And like also like that was a big knock on Franz Wagner coming out. Obviously, this is a very different player than Franz Wagner. Obviously,
Killian Hayes too. Yeah.
yeah. That's what I was gonna say. Is like obviously as a lead playmaker, his ability to go both directions is something that matters a whole lot more. But it is something that we've seen in recent years. Like, this guy only goes this way, and a lot of times guys are able to get over that hump. So I'm sort of buying that there. And I think like in recent games, like even in the Maryland game, he had that one drive early where he got to the bucket against Julian Reese going right and finished. And I thought like that drive, like he just looked comfortable. He just took what was given that way. Mid-range stuff is really solid. So we'll focus just kind of on the scoring first. But I think the overall scoring package is really good between the inside touch, the ability to pull up, create for himself, create in isolation. He is in the 85th percentile scoring out of isolation this year. So like a guy who obviously is like best with the ball screen, but can really, really just get buckets. I'm really bullish on what we've seen out of Kasparas this year as a scorer. So I'll throw it over to you. How do you feel about him just as a scorer first before we get into the playmaking, the defense, and everything else?
Yeah, he's it's kind of weird that I'm bringing this up, but as a guard, I feel like it's important. He's pretty below the rim.
Very.
The athleticism
one
is
dunk on the year.
Yeah.
And I think it was if I'm not mistaken, I'm checking Synergy. It was a transition dunk too. So no half court dunks. The one thing I forgot to mention though is he does get to the line a lot. Like he's so good with his.
I was just about to bring that up.
He has that like sky high free throw rate that's like over 53%.
Yeah, it's 53.3. Gets 5 free throw attempts a game. So you kind of like to see that, right? Like especially in college, 5 free throw attempts in college is a big deal, especially in his conference, right? Mm-hmm. He's what I would call like a counter puncher offensively. He's not a guy that I think is like ready to like quick strike. He kind of analyzes what the defense is giving them, goes to a move to kind of see. It's kind of like a quarterback reading his own defense, right? Like as a scorer, he does what a quarterback would do, kind of like where he like goes in motion one way, where like a quarterback will send a receiver in motion to see what the defense is doing. And if a man follows him, he's like, okay, he's in man. I can read this coverage. Like Kasparas can kind of do the same thing where he like goes to one direction, like as the scorer, to see where the defense is going. And then based on how that defender is kind of like sizing and measuring him up, he can either continue with that move or he can go to one of his mini counters around the basket. And I think that that's like very savvy. When you're speaking to the craft, like in my head, I'm picturing those little nifty, like up and unders or like step through, rip through type moves that he can go to and finish. And like I said, he gets to the rim, but he also can finish through contact as well. I think some of the things that you look to at the shot, and I think that this is one of his major criticisms, is right now in college, he is like what I would classify as a tough shot maker.
Yes.
And it's almost like all of his shots are like heavily contested. You know what I mean? And with the lack of athleticism and I would say like clean separation skills, he relies on shielding a lot, but he doesn't really separate. I think that's where people are kind of like, I don't know how this translates up a level. And it kind of reminds me of how I felt about Reed Shepherd last year when you look at the metrics for both of these guys and you're like, what the heck are you talking about? There's just something about the eye test with both of them that kind of has me more hesitant on being super duper high up there. Like I had Reed in a very similar range. It's funny. Like I'm actually like thinking back to this now. I didn't come into the show thinking about talking about this, but I actually have them both in like a very similar range where like I respect everything that they're doing like at a production level, but I don't know how they separate and create for themselves at the next level just based on how tough Kasparas makes his shots like at this level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's definitely reasonable. I think I'm a little more optimistic about how he's able to separate. Like, I think there's going to be better carryover there. I think where I worry about it more is with his downhill game. So like we mentioned, like the touch and like finishing through contact, but it's like, okay, given his strength, I wouldn't say like issues in college. Like it's not like he's just getting bounced around everywhere.
The size helps, like the length and the size is, and he uses like he leverages himself so well that where I think that's where when we lean to like a descriptor of like craft with a guy like Kasparas, it's because he is so adept to using his body to his own benefit as opposed to like having like a clean separation score, you know, like, does that make sense? It's like, it's almost inexplicable based on like how you watch it and like, how do you try to describe it using when I try to use my poor Arkansas vocabulary, right? Like it's hard to really put it into words, but there's a lot of finesse and a lot of craft as opposed to just outright advantage creation.
And I do think it helps that he's very like slithery is kind of the word that I use a lot in my notes. Like he's able to just sort of wiggle his way through traffic a lot, which helps. Like he's able to sort of knife through the lane. I think what I worry about is when it's like downhill creation in the NBA and he's a guy who's sort of predisposed to going in one direction. And like, how is that going to hold up? Like when guys throw a body on him? Like that's where I worry about it. It's like, okay. And then if it is more perimeter oriented, and then like there is that like loss of ability to separate backwards and sideways at that point. And he is predominantly becoming a pull-up scorer. And then it is sort of like tough shot making dependent. Like, is there going to be times where it's a lot less effective? I think that's a real possibility. I think I'm ultimately just sort of optimistic on the overall driving craft based on his ability to like play ball screens in different ways, use misdirection, a good first step on catch and goes. Like, I think there's enough stuff there to compensate for it, but I'd feel a little bit better if he was also like pretty powerful.
Yeah. And it helps too that he's aggressive, you know, he's not like, he's not tentative. Yeah, exactly. I would feel way worse about him if he was much more selective but Illinois like cannot afford for him to be selective. Like they need him to be like the hard nosed, like I'm getting to where I'm going regardless type guy.
So the next thing I want to ask you about is Dirty Dancer immediately brought up in the chat. I think it's a question that a lot of people want to talk about. He said his turnovers are maddening.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting sort of debate with Kasparas, I guess you could call it. He is a magnificent passer at times. He also is like prone to the occasional wild turnover. So 31.7 assist rate, 22.4 turnover rate. So like really like some really, really bad turnovers. Like if I look at my spreadsheet of like guards who stuck in the NBA, like the highest turnover rate guy was Caruso at 25.7. And then like nobody else is above Kasparas. Like it's a really high turnover rate.
Wow.
Granted, it's also one of those things where like the usage is really high.
I was going to say that usage correlation.
Like, and there's also just like not a lot of other playmaking outside of like Boswell. You know what I mean? Like Will Riley is a fine passer. Ivicic is a fine passer, but the offense runs through Kasparas. Like he's
a generator
so much. Yeah. But yeah, what do you make of the turnovers? Like, what are you seeing on that front, and how worried are you about the turnovers?
I'm not super worried about it. I don't think that it shows up on film as much as the numbers scream, "Hey, look at me." You know what I mean?
Sure.
He's good for like one head scratcher. I feel like, one or two head scratchers a game. But if you look at what he does and how he, provides so much for everybody else, like he's like the son of Illinois solar system. Like everything just revolves around him. And it's just incredible to me that the numbers are as high as they are. And I think too, at his age and like level of competition and adaptation to a new style of playing basketball, his passing is almost as difficult as his shot selection. It's just uglier because the ball leaves his hands because he passes. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he's a risk taker as a scorer and a passer. It just stands out more with playmaking because there's obviously like the potential for someone to get it who's not on his team. But I mean, there's no denying the vision that he has, the way that he can, kind of maneuver around a pick and roll, apply pressure to that second level of defense. And then all of a sudden someone's got to make the least bad decision possible at that point. And he's usually pretty good at leveraging them. The passing to me, Maxwell, like, again, it's almost inexplicable, but I think that he's like he has good vision. I just don't know if it's enough to where, how do you feel about this, right? We're talking about him being drafted, right? Some people have him top 5, like in that 3 to 4 range.
Yeah, I've got him 3 currently.
All right, so Maxwell, you're drafting him at 3. Like you are the, let's say, Brooklyn Nets. Like,
sure.
Do you want to live and die by Kasparas being the lead ball handler for an NBA team?
Yeah, I think so.
You do? Okay.
So I really like the vision, and I think it's like really good while attacking. I think he's great at using his head and eyes to like deceive and bend defenses to maximize advantages. He's got that last second fluidity is a phrase I use all the time, but it's like that ability to just like get deep into the paint and like continue to react to the help that is coming your way, read those rotations, and continue to adjust on the fly to maximize what opens up. I also think like he's underrated in terms of being really sharp with the first 2 options out of a ball screen, whether it's like pick and pop or just like I'm taking it, or like pick and roll. All right, I've got 2 on the ball. There it is. Bam. I think he can do the simple stuff really well. I do think he gets a little too much dip on his chip at times. Like, obviously, like that's how you end up turning it over. And in the Maryland game the other day, there was some stuff where it's just like, you got to be careful with it, where it was like going back to the basket against a quick guy like Jacoby Gillespie, where it's like, you got to know that when you go back to the basket against him, like he is going to try to get around and steal the ball from you. Little things like that, where it's just like, no, you got to know the opposing personnel there. Where I'm sort of optimistic about this is we've seen a lot of guys just sort of figure out how to reduce their turnovers. The kind of the second they get into the league, I think people just know, like, I'm going to be on a tighter leash. Like, if you look at Keontae George, really struggling to put the ball in the basket, obviously, but this is a guy who had a negative assist to turnover in college, like without even being on the ball all the time. 4.4 assists to 2.5 turnovers his rookie year, 5.8 to 2.9 this year. Isaiah Collier was like a guy last year that was really turnover prone, and he didn't even have like the shooting gravity that Kasparas has. Again, really struggling to put the ball in the basket, but 4.8 assists to 2.6 turnovers this year on a team where like assists aren't the easiest to come by. So I tend to be really optimistic about what he's going to be as a playmaker. I think the really high end, like best passes that he makes are passes that not a lot of guys can make. And I think that in general, we've seen guys be able to sort of pare down the mistakes. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing on the playmaking front. And I think that would be like my main rationale for having it 3 is I'm sort of a firm believer in with passing at the college level. I don't even want to call it the flashes because like he's consistently making great passes every single game.
Yeah.
But like don't sweat the mistakes as much with like 19 and 20-year-olds. It would be different if it was like I hate to bring up the same as a Bulls fan, a Denzel Valentine situation where it's like, all right, man, you're 23 and you're making that turnover. You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit different. The older guys get, you want to give them like less of a leash at that point. But yeah, I think between the creativity, the manipulation, it's just a matter of refinement. And I'll take the guy that I need to refine every single time over the guy where I'm like, boy, I sure hope he's able to develop a more advanced read of the floor when he's playing better competition.
So I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I want to contextualize this in terms of like NBA players, because ultimately like this is where we're going to go. So I actually got 2 ways I want to take this conversation, Maxwell, if you'll entertain me.
Yeah.
One, if you're taking him 3, do you hope that the high end outcome is like that of like a Cade Cunningham type player? Like where, because if you're taking him on a bad team, what I worry about is him being my only like trustworthy ball handler. Yeah. And for a long time, Detroit really only had Cade as like that advantage, like creator for like passing score. And even he had a hard time with the Pistons, and he, you know, again, high turnovers, kind of still struggles with that at times, even as late in his career as he is. I guess my question is like, could you put him in a Cade Cunningham role on a bad team, like as like the lone guy? Do you feel like you can?
I don't. Well, who else am I doing that with? Is the question. Like at the end of the day, we got to draft who's there. Am I taking Ace Bailey in that situation? Am I throwing VJ Edgecombe to the Wolves as a playmaker, given his like issues with spatial awareness and traffic? Like, am I taking Ace Bailey who doesn't pass at all? Am I taking a flyer on some of these other guys? Like you got to take who's there at the end of the day, and that's kind of where I fall into it with Kasparas at 3. As I think out of that next group, he's probably the best initiator bet at this point. As far as like comps, I kind of like Dragic is the guy because he is a 4 and white that I think of at Nubs. Just like, but like play style wise, like that's kind of what I'm envisioning. I think the point about Cade is an interesting one because Cade had better size, like bulk and whatnot, and height, and probably wingspan too. But like Cade just never got to the basket a whole lot. Like Cade was like also sort of a poor separator, didn't really like to get all the way to the rim. Where with Kasparas, I'm a little bit more optimistic that in his early years, he's probably going to do a better job of generating rim pressure based on just how good he's going to be at separating and getting downhill. So that's sort of what I'm hoping for. So like this year, a third of Cade shots are coming at the rim in the half court. As a rookie, that was only at 25.1%. Like so many of his shots, like it was a very jump shot oriented game. Yeah. And I think, and like that's how Cade was in college too. And people wanted to blame the spacing.
And he shot like 40% in college
on that team. Yeah. The pull up 3 was like money for him at the same time. But I do think that that's sort of a concern for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess my other question would be, do you believe in Yegor Dimon as a passer more than Kasparas? And if so, I guess like is the shot making like that much better with Kasparas is why you would have him over a Yegor?
Yeah, that's exactly why. To be completely frank, is I think it just comes down to the scoring gravity with like Yegor. We've seen games where the shot goes in, but we've also seen most of them where it doesn't. So from that standpoint, I just think Kasparas is going to create so much more gravity. I also think there's like a pretty big difference in their ability to separate too. Like that's been what's killed Yegor in these games against good teams. Is guys just like play him tight and he has no way to shake loose. Like doesn't have any sidestep speed, can't really beat guys downhill, doesn't have the power to overcome them. Where like Kasparas is just so much shiftier that I buy his ability to separate, get inside, and do all that a whole lot more.
Okay. That's all that I have. And I see some comments in the chat about defense. I don't think that you're drafting Kasparas because of his defense. I think that the hope would be a disruptive, like an irritant, like a just show good effort, and then just make up that much more for it on the offensive end, right?
He's sort of your classic like guy that gets hidden a lot. But also, like,
he's tall, so he could do some cool stuff,
Yeah, and like the feel is there and whatever. So like his defensive like analytics are like really poor, right? Like he's got like a 2 steal rate, which for a guard is pretty poor. Extremely low block rate, like 0.3 block rate. Which again, like that speaks to the verticality issues that you mentioned earlier. So like we're talking guards, 0.3 block rate or below. It's Colin Sexton, Grayson Allen, Jose Alvarado, Peyton Pritchard, Devontae Graham, Jalen Brunson, Bryn Forbes, like a lot of the like jump shootery kind of guards.
Smaller too, yeah.
So very interesting that he's like, I think the only tall one out of that group. I guess Grayson Allen. I would have bet Allen probably had a better block rate at some other point in his career without looking.
Grayson was an athletic freak though.
Yeah, Grayson could jump out of the gym.
Yeah.
And that could also be a typo on my behalf too. You never know. But
never.
Oh no, Grayson, weirdly had low block rates except for his freshman year too. That's odd. Would not have anticipated that.
No.
But yeah, I really like Kasparas. I think the defense is like not going to be good. I think certainly too he's a guy that teams could kind of hunt out and target at points because like the physical stuff that we mentioned too, where it's not just the fact that he's not going to jump really high, but it's also going to be the fact that for more developed athletes early in their career, they're going to be able to plow through them. I do think what I like about it is I think his screen navigation can be good. There's times like he does a good job of staying connected. His recovery tools aren't very good, but he does make second efforts. His timing on things like blowing up handoffs is really good. And I think he's also a guy who stays disciplined. Like he just doesn't do too much guarding the ball, which part of that is like role. He doesn't want to get in foul trouble and this team needs him to be out of foul trouble. But I haven't seen anything from him defensively that has really made me freak out. Other than just like the physical stuff and that he's like a little bit stiff laterally.
Yeah. And you got to wonder too, like he's so important to what Illinois is doing. Like, can he sell out as hard as he wants to on the defensive end and that type of stuff? He did foul out in like 8 minutes.
That was rough.
Yeah. The infamous foul out game.
Interesting question in the chat from Nornrad. Or actually, this is from
Mellowman Ace.
How do you guys compare KJ to Halliburton? The big difference is like Halliburton just didn't make mistakes. Straight up, we were talking about like the most under control poised, like what in the NBA is like that too. But in college, 3.6 assists to 0.8 turnovers as a freshman. Just really.
What was his free throw rate?
Free throw rate was 0.156. He never got to the rim.
Sheesh.
It was all touch with Halliburton. Let's see how often he got to the rim too, because that number is crazy low too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So the analytical profile for Halliburton wasn't that great.
Wonky. Yeah. 13% of his half court shots came at the rim.
Yeah. So KJ is what, over 20%?
He's at like 33. Like so it's like way, way different stylistically. Like both very impressive passers. With Halliburton, it was a much more perimeter passing oriented game.
And I feel like Halliburton
far fewer mistakes.
I feel like he was a better ball handler and like could do like had more like creative craft with the ball in his hand as opposed to what KJ can do. And that's what I think like the major separator is. Maybe there were just a lot of analytical people that looked at Halliburton was just out based on those numbers because that draft was crazy. It
was weird. And it's interesting too. Like I've gone back, like I like to go back and like look at a lot of like draft media and like podcasts and stuff at the time. And like so much of the Halliburton talk sort of wrote off higher upside outcomes because it was like classic role player stuff of like, oh yeah, you can do this, but like super low foul rate, like not athletic, whatever. But hey,
doesn't get to the rim. You never do. All right.
I think that we can put a pin in KJ. So you've got him around 8. I've got him around 3.
I think the highest I could get him is like 5 at the highest.
Really?
Like, there are just some guys that I'm like
You like the idea
unless they do something criminal, like there's no way that he can supplant them.
Interesting. So, I see. Like I'd potentially be open to the idea of him at 2.
Woo, okay.
Potentially, we'll see how the rest of the season shakes out. But I could see a world where I end up having him there. I could also see a world where I end up having him like 5, 6, 7. I mean, who knows? We'll see. Plenty of time.
Maybe
plenty of
even
time,
8.
Plenty of data points. So we're gonna take a quick break. Stick with us. We're gonna talk Collin Murray-Boyles, which is another fascinating conversation. So
love
stick
that.
with us. All right. So Stephen, this past week you wrote about Collin Murray-Boyles at South Carolina, one of the most highly anticipated returning prospects in this class. He has done a fantastic job out of the gate so far. He is a 6'8", 245-pound sophomore who is young for the class. So keep that in mind too, as we discuss this. This is a guy who is like 20 still. So there's a lot of the sophomores are going to be quite a bit older than him come draft night. 15.1 points per game on 58.8, 29.4, 66.7 splits, 9.1 rebounds per game, 2.3 assists to 2.8 turnovers, 1.3 steals, and 1.3 blocks. Sort of a classic, like, analytics darling, but not classic in the sense of, like, this is a weird kind of player. Like, you just do not see many guys like this. He is exceptionally strong. He is very bulky. He is bizarrely gifted athletically. Like, just an odd, funky combination of traits and talents and feel. So what led you to wanting to write about Collin Murray-Boyles, and then how did you feel coming out of that exercise?
Yeah, so I wrote about him. The article is up at noceilingsnba.com. It's 100% free. You should go check it out. I titled it Collin Murray-Boyles Basketball Amoeba, because he is just one of these guys that you just touched on. It's like he is, like, for you Bartorvik fans out there, he's just like green in a lot of different areas, right? And he is just so talented. And I see in the chat, he's a borderline first rounder. He feels like a remnant from the 90s. Like, yeah, Dirty Dancer in a way. He does feel like a 90s basketball player, but I feel like he's kind of modernized it in a way. And I don't know if people are noticing, but it feels like there's starting to become a swing back in like what 90s valued in like athletics. Like, it's starting to kind of come back in a way. Especially with like what the Eagles just ran for 7 touchdowns in the playoffs. Like, that's the first time that's happened in a long time. But Collin Murray-Boyles, I went to write about him because he was hands down like the top returning prospect coming into the year. And whenever I came back, it just felt like he had done nothing to say that he's still not the best returner. But when I see him in like mid first, late first, for like a lot of the like reputable draft places. I have him at 6. And I think because he is super efficient, he makes good decisions, he is very strong. I value physicality and athleticism, especially translating up a level. I just feel like he's going to be able to take NBA bumps. He's not going to be one of these guys that have to play in the G because he can't hang on the court. You know what I mean? Like, you could trust him to go in and play like right away.
But real quick though, the idea of Collin Murray-Boyles in the G League is really funny to me. What do you think like the Collin Murray-Boyles like G League stat line would be?
Like
that's like a 30 and 20. That's a sheep.
He's putting up Jokic. He's putting up Jokic numbers because he can pass too. Like, a lot of people, I feel like, sleep on his playmaking ability, but he like the day that I wrote about Collin, I think he went up and put like 8 assists against a really good team. I forget who it was. I think it was Florida. He put up he put up 8 assists that game.
Only 2 turnovers.
Only 2 turnovers. And like, it wasn't like I'm gonna hand the ball off to like a rolling ball handler. Like, he was like top of the key, finding cutters, guiding cutters, like make a couple dribbles, make an interior dump off. Like, he's an above average feel passer at his position. And I feel like that doesn't get really discussed at all. So now you can see him being in an NBA offense, having the offense flow through him because he's a reliable DHO option now, or he's a guy you can put at the elbow. He can face up I can't tell you how many times in SEC play he is like taking an SEC 4 or 5 out to the perimeter and just beating them off the dribble. Like he is not. I feel like the conversation about him is just that he's so big and strong that he just bullies his way in the paint and just finds tough shots. He can do that, but he is also nimble and shifty enough and athletic and possesses the type of feel and craft to where he can take people out on the perimeter and beat them off of the bounce. And I don't feel like that really gets discussed enough at all. And then defensively, I mean, he is strong enough to hang out with some big men in the paint. He's long enough to contest and even block their shots in the paint, but he's also like shifty and nimble enough to make plays out of help and deny and stuff like that. So I just think that he is so good at basketball. And if you look at the shooting, like that next thing I can already hear, I can feel it. From the universe is people are like, but the shot, like if you go and look at his shooting, the shot doesn't look bad, right? Out of all the shots that he's taken and he's missed, only 2 of them were bad misses. One was an air ball. I'll give you that. Mm-hmm. The second one was like the shot clock was running down and he had to throw something up. The other ones were like good tight shot groupings, just misses. But he's actually attempting 3-pointers now. And that was like a knock on him last year. He's attempting 3-pointers. He's actually making them. He's passing, he's rebounding, he's scoring, and he's doing it from multiple levels on the floor. And you can trust him to play day one. Like, I don't know why. And you mentioned the age right off the rip too, Maxwell. I don't know that, like, why people wouldn't want to take him higher than, like, back half of the first, other than it just being a fantastic value play from a team, you know?
Yeah.
He's deserving of higher.
Mm-hmm. So in the No Ceilings Plus section of my column this week, I actually wrote a little bit about him. Steven's column is like more in depth, so definitely go check out Steven's. But check out what I have to say too in the No Ceilings Plus section for my column this week. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think I am like a weird Collin Murray-Boyles centrist, where I feel like I actually have him higher than consensus, but like lower than the people that are super into him.
Sure.
So I have him at 11 right now.
Totally fair.
I think the defensive stuff like rocks. Like he is so nimble, as you said, perfect word choice for a guy who's 245. Really good discipline on the perimeter, freaky mirroring skills. Like his ability to just like move his hands and react to what's in front of him at the point of attack is exceptional. And he's so bulky and long, like can't get around him, can't get through him. Like those are my favorite type of point of attack defenders, where it's like between the footwork, the length, the agility, the power. That's a nightmare. Not easy to deal with. And like you said, too, he can hold up on the block on the inside. Good block rate, good steal rate, really good balance, too. Like you mentioned, like rotationally and stuff like that. Like just knows what's going on, but also not a guy who's unable to recover or get back into the game at all. Really like what I've seen from him on that front. I think like the one thing I worry about with him defensively a little bit is like if you are playing him at the 5 against a true 5, it's just a little easy to go over the top of him. And I would say the other thing that he's had an issue with is at times on the perimeter, he gets way too handsy. He can play a lot more hands-on instead of playing wide and sort of sliding his feet. And that's led to a lot of foul trouble this year, especially in games against good teams. Like that was like a recurring theme for him earlier in the year, if I'm recalling off the top of my head, was he had some foul issues in good games. Offensively, I think it's a weird game. Like you mentioned, the face-up stuff is real. Like it's not just the power stuff where he was making Janai Broom look like a mouse in a house guard. But the ball skill stuff is like funky. Like there is some real snap on like his crossovers and the quickness on his spin moves and stuff that it works. Like it just kind of no matter who's in front of him, he usually just finds a way to get inside. And he's got really great touch, 71.4% at the rim in the half court. Has the lunch pail stuff too. Will set good screens, good offensive rebounder.
Yeah.
Capable of making really impressive passes. I think where I struggle a little bit is I don't see him being more than a like acceptable shooter on moderate volume long term. I feel like there was a lot of focus on what his shot was going to be this year. And I think if he was like going to be a real deal shooter, we'd be like seeing something closer to that now. Like last year, there were people that were straight up like, he shot in high school. It's fine. I'm not worried about it at all. And it's like, I think we should be worried about it a little bit. Like, I do think there is a real possibility that like, he's just not a shooter like that. I mean, he's taking one a game and he's under 30%. I don't hate how it looks. I think there's times where it looks fine. I think there's times it looks a little bit funkier. Not great indicators at the free throw line either. I don't know. So I'm just not super sold on that. And the other thing is, I think where I'm a bit lower on him is as it comes to his passing. I think his vision is really good. I think his execution can be lacking.
Okay.
Would the assist numbers be better if he was on a better team? 1000% yes. Like, I don't think people realize like how much better last year's South Carolina team was because people just like didn't really talk about the rest of that team very much. But like Michi Johnson was a guy that a lot of people wanted in the portal. That's why Ohio State took him back, even though he hasn't. I don't think he's played this year. I think he's been injured. BJ Mack was really good. Talon Cooper was awesome. Like Talon Cooper was a Portsmouth guy, a summer league invite. Like Talon was like the most useful type of guard you could have next to someone like Collin Murray-Boyles, who was also really long, knockdown shooter off the catch, like really good range. This year's team does not have any of those players. They play
another freshman named Conyers, who I kind of like long term. Yeah, but now, like, he should not be getting major SEC minutes,
And like Cam Scott was one of those guys too, where I was like, oh, I kind of like Cam Scott, and like the ball just will not go in the basket for him this year.
Yeah.
So I do think his assist numbers would be higher. I do get frustrated with his turnovers at times too, just like Jakucionis, where like it just feels like at times there's not a lot of thoughtfulness about the execution. It's just like, I'm just kind of throwing this ball in there, and like he won't anticipate help properly. He won't throw it with enough zip on it. Like there's just all these little things that can lead to turnovers for him that I find to be quite frustrating. So I think between that and the shot, I'm just like a little bit lower on the overall offensive skill package, but I ultimately think the feel is there and the productivity is there to such a point that I think this is a plus, a good NBA player. But I think where I'm different is that I don't really buy the idea of like a Draymond outcome so much as I buy the idea.
I would never.
I think he's like Xavier Tillman plus. Because I think he's like, if you look at Xavier Tillman at a similar age, I think like Murray-Boyles is outpacing him. And you have to remember that Tillman was on better teams than the one that Murray-Boyles is on right now in particular. So that's sort of what I see him as, is like, it's going to be a little bit fit dependent. Like you're going to have to be sort of careful about what lineups you play him in. There's going to be certain fives he can't play against, certain fives that are tougher for him. Like he's just funky, but I ultimately just think he's good. I think between how effectively he's able to generate shots for himself inside, score inside, defend multiple guys, that's all valuable.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? Like I have him at 6. I do think that there's upside. I don't view him as I saw a couple threads today actually where he was getting compared to Draymond. I would never compare him to Draymond, right? But I do think that he has good value, like as a scorer, as a defender, as a kind of like big who can have playmaking ran through him, as a rebounder. Like at a certain point, like all the skills that he has, I do value a lot. And in a draft where everybody has kind of shown that, oh, I have a major question mark, but I'm a high upside guy, but I can't shoot, or I'm a high upside guy, and I don't know if I'm going to see an NBA floor my first year because I'm not strong enough. Like there's so many of those guys to where I know I could put him on the court, and I know that he can play like a very good role for me. And there's like some sneaky good teams or like middling teams that could be like in that range to where we already got like some of these kind of high upside guys. Let me get a guy who can come in and like contribute like day one and be just like a winner on our team. And that's kind of like where I see him.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's really good. Like I just like ultimately just come back to the fact that I think, and I apologize, my daughter's having like a big
oh dude, you're fine.
No nap today. So I apologize for any anger kind of coming through in the background. My wife's doing the best she can to get her under control. So I think ultimately, like you said, there's just enough productivity in a variety of ways that I just buy it scaling up whether it's funky or not. Dirty Dancing introduced Brandon Clark. That's another guy I thought about quite a bit with him. I think
not bad. I kind of like that.
He's not like the bouncy dude that Brandon Clark is, but he's stronger. And we love our strong guys over here. So
he's like a weird Jaime Jaquez, Brandon Clark like mashup, I think.
Yeah.
You know? So like, and I've seen PJ Washington or other players like that. I just think that he's a productive player.
He's good.
Like
he's just good at basketball. Yeah. Like at a certain point. And like this could be a guy too where like I think last year I had Edey like a little bit below where he went, but Memphis was a team where like the fit just made so much sense that it could be one of those two where like, depending on your team, your board might be a whole heck of a lot different as far as
like if he goes to Memphis, he could be a weird Memphis guy. They kind of love these funky players,
Yeah. And it's one of those things too where it's like if I'm Detroit, I don't know that he makes quite as much sense.
1 second, please. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I'll just kind of roll with it for a minute. But yeah, so if you're Detroit, I don't know that he makes as much sense there as he does with a team like Charlotte. Where with a team like Charlotte, I think he's going to be quite useful because they have a good amount of shooting around him. They would be able to go in smaller lineups with him, and they just need that defensive presence. Where with a team like Detroit, it's like, all right, Beef Stew is proven himself to be a better rim protector this year. You've just got different ways that you can make this work. We're going to shift gears real quick. We're going to go to Yaxel Lendeborg at UAB. He is a 6'9", 240-pound graduate. Maybe a potential interesting decision coming up for Lendeborg this year, as he will technically, I believe, have extra JUCO eligibility. If he decides to use it, I'm sort of under the assumption he's just going to go in. But who knows? We'll see. So Lendeborg was a guy I covered for No Stone Unturned this offseason. So he's sort of a longer term favorite of mine as a stat sheet stuffing, high feel, high energy for 245 pounds, got a little bit stronger this offseason. This year, he's averaging 16.8 points per game, 10.1 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists to 2.4 turnovers, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks. He is shooting 57.6% from the field. 3-point percentage as of the data in front of me is at 31.4. He was 1 for 2 today, so that'll be back up a little bit. I just like Yaxel a lot. I like the idea of Yaxel a lot. I like the motor of Yaxel a lot, and I just like the variety of ways that he has to impact the game. But I also just love this funky late blooming trajectory. So for people who aren't familiar with Lendeborg and you're like, okay, he's 6'9", he stuffs the stat sheet. What I think makes him particularly interesting is this is a guy who played JUCO for 3 years, and prior to that played 11 games of basketball during high school. Made the team. He never made the team in middle school. Made the team as a freshman. Was removed from the team due to his grades. Didn't have the grades the next 2 years. Hits his growth spurt. His mom's like, "Get your stuff together." Gets his grades together, and then at the end of his senior year, plays 11 games. And then gets noticed at like a exposure, like spotlight event, and ends up at a JUCO because colleges are like, well, I don't know if I want to take a chance on this guy. And when he went to that JUCO, he told me like, that's when I realized like, oh, I could like do something with this. Like that coaching staff really broke through to him, and it's changed his life. And I also want to throw in too, I think a lot of times guys like that, there can be like a does he love basketball question. I interviewed Yaxel for that series. This guy loves basketball. Like for every area of the game that we talked about, he would tell me who he watches that like he picks up on stuff from. So it was like playmaking from the top of the key. Oh yeah, well like I watched Domantas Sabonis for this. Oh yeah, for some of the passing, like for the downhill stuff, I actually watched the Magic Johnson. For rebound, oh yeah, I actually will like go watch just like old Bulls games to see how Dennis Rodman like boxed out and found angles on the board. Like everything, like Yaxel loves basketball. At the very least, he cares enough about it to seek out tape to develop individual skills in his game. So I would personally put that to bed. But I think with Yaxel, like he's just a guy who has NBA size and NBA feel. And the other thing is with like a lot of these guys that come to the game late, there's usually this really significant curve with feel. Yaxel is ahead of the curve feel-wise. Yes. He is like orchestrating offense from the top of the key, which he did a little bit last year, but there'd be some mistakes mixed in. This year, he is like putting the ball on the deck. He's attacking downhill, like bending defenses, attacking in the paint, and then making wraparound dump off passes to their other big man Coleman for easy dunks. Like He's seeing the floor downhill. I love his passing and ball skills arsenal for a 6'9" guy. And it's so fascinating to me that this is a guy who's late to the game and is thinking so far ahead of everybody. He's all over the glass, plays his tail off, loves contact, gets to the line all the time, has improved dramatically as a finisher since filling out his frame, and a scheme versatile defender. If you want to play into the 5 against a small ball lineup, you'll be able to do that because he can play in those aggressive defenses that UAB runs where they've got him like hard hedging, flying out to the perimeter, working his butt off to recover back to the basket. But he's also long enough, the wingspan's rumored to be like 7'3", that you can put him out there and drop, and he can still just sort of like mind his distance, play that gap between, you know, the big man and the ball handler, get to the big man quickly if that's who they go to, and still turn him away at the rim. Like, whatever you want to do with him defensively, you can do it. And I think he's more than like fluid enough to guard on the perimeter. He's not necessarily quick, but he's really fluid. And when you're that big, that's all you have to be. I just think he is a guy who leaves his fingerprints all over the game, has a requisite level of feel and skill that, like, I jokingly like use the phrase like the Delano Banton school of playability all the time. Where it's like, you can just throw that guy out there and he won't kill you. Is he going to be a plus player? Like,
right now?
Yeah, like we'll see like how positive it can turn into. Like Trendon Watford, like these kind of dudes just like hang around the league, if nothing else. And I think with Yaxel's with Yaxel's like bizarre development trajectory, I think there's a chance for him to be a whole lot more than that. So I'm really optimistic about Yaxel. How do you feel about his game?
Dude, Yax rocks. He is so good. I know that he was a guy that you and I were talking about a little bit last year coming into the summer when we were doing our preseason notes and stuff like that. Man, I love Yax. I had him in the early second. Norin Rad in the chat asked if you got CMB at 6, where would you have Yaxel? I have him as like a late first, beginning of the second. Yep. A lot of that does have to do with like the class and age difference. I mean, he's a young for his class. He's, I think, going to be 22, like when he's drafted or in his like rookie season in the NBA. But he is so awesome. He's playing his way up my board, like consistently. I think too, playing at a school like UAB, we've talked about this with like some of these other kind of like 6'8", 6'9" guys who are probably going to be wings and forwards in the NBA, but because of the school that they play for, they have to play 5 just because they have size and they're smart. Like they have the length and the ability to be able to cover a lot of ground. Yax does that. And I think too that he is going to be able to play. And again, you know how we were talking about how 90s basketball in a lot of ways is like starting to come back. There's like multiple big man lineups on a lot of teams now. And I think Yax can play like 3, 4, 5, like easily in the NBA, depending on the lineup he's in. He's super athletic, dude. He can shoot, he can pass, he can rebound. The shot is like really the swing skill because it's kind of streaky, but he's capable, like if that makes sense. So I think that Yaxel has a really good shot. I think that he's going to be one of these guys that gets invited to a lot of events, and probably every time he gets invited, he's going to work his way up into the conversation. I'm a super big fan, dude. Like there's not a lot that he does poorly. You know, I would say for the position he plays at UAB, like you would want to see the shot blocking be a little bit better. Yeah. But I don't think that's going to be his role. He's going to be like a weak side guy.
And I would say too, like this year too, they've played him and Coleman together a lot more. So he's been around the basket less and on the perimeter more. So you do have that bit of a dip in block rate, but I do also think that that's allowed us to see a better, get a better sample of him guarding
representation. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, like he's going to be a 2-level guy, which is fine because like only the best people in the NBA or best players, I should say, maybe not the best people, but the best at basketball people, those shots are reserved for them. So like as a role player, can you space the floor reliably? Yax, I think that's what he's showing that he can do. Can he set really good screens? Absolutely. This dude is like chiseled from rock. You know, he's a really strong guy. He's a connective playmaker, and like he is not afraid to get nasty on every end of the basketball court. So like I love Yax, dude. He is like, he could be like the No Ceilings mascot for me this year. Like I love Yax. He's incredible.
I'm right there with you. I think he's awesome. So I would say like the concerns, I guess, would be the shot for one. So he is taking, as of this recording, around like 3.2 threes per 100 possessions. Solid free throw shooter, like been up and down throughout his college career, even dating back to JUCO, but like 76.4% the free throw line. I sort of buy the shot. It's something that he worked on a lot. The volume is better. A lot of these are pick and pops too, so it's not even like wide open stand-ups. I think he gets into it pretty confidently. Like I would say between him and Murray-Boyles, I like the way his shot looks better. I think he's a little bit more fluid going into it. But again, we're talking about a guy that's older in a lesser conference, et cetera, which is why Collin Murray-Boyles is higher. So I think the shot is like where it could potentially swing. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot this year is like, okay, let's say I like a prospect a lot, like I do with Yaxel. Like, who are the other guys that I've liked in this similar mold that haven't panned out or have panned out? And then like, where does he fall within that spectrum? So like on the spectrum of like,
please say the names that I'm thinking of.
Sure. So like the guys that I'm like, I liked these guys and like it didn't quite click are like Orlando Robinson, Pete Nance, Isaiah Mobley. And then conversely, there's like the high end, like Kevon Looney, Brandon Clark to like tall Jalen Williams group.
That's weird because I'm thinking more like Dylan Jones, Jalen Slauson, Vince Williams Jr. type role for him.
Yeah, and I would say those are three guys where it's like I don't like that. Like, like two of those three out of those three haven't clicked. I would say,
but that's like the PJ Washington. Yeah.
I would say like where I like him more than I like Slauson. Like Slauson was like I feel like the one mid-major guy I wasn't super into. It was like Slauson always felt so back to the basket for me that it was just like I don't believe this. Like I don't believe this will scale up. Where with Yax, he is much more of like a face-up guy who can attack a spot up traditionally and sort of fly all over the place. That's where I feel better about Yax than I felt about Slauson, who's like still sort of toiling in the G League. So like for me, it's like, can I get him to that Jalen Williams level? Arkansas Jalen Williams, now the tall one on Oklahoma City named Jalen Williams outcome.
J Will, not J Dub.
J Will. Yes. Yeah. Can I get him to the J Will spot of like, he's tall, he makes enough decisions, he sort of knows where to be, his fluidity helps him go a long way defensively. He can play the 5 in certain lineups. He can also play the 4, even if he's not like a knockdown guy. The handoff and like playmaking stuff gives you like the 4.5 out spacing. Like, can he get to that point? I think he can. It's funky because again, like I think they're probably like pretty close in age because J Will was like a sneaky young guy coming out. And Yaxel is older, but the development stuff makes it a little weird. But I'm fairly optimistic about it because I think what he has over some of those other guys, I just buy the face up stuff a little bit more. I think he's a little bit stronger than the other, than the like the Pete Nance types.
Yeah, and I like him defending out in space a lot more than some of those other guys as well, especially up because I believe in the mobility that he does have. The rebounding is there. I just think that there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to look at his production at UAB. And like I said, he's going to be one of those guys that I think that the offseason of like the combine process of this year he might benefit the most from like that time of year. You know, that's where you can really see the stock rise because I feel like people have kind of already seen what they needed to see from him at UAB. So I don't know how much he's doing this year to like change anybody's minds, but he's going to be one of those, let me get this guy in front of you. And then you will be sold on him. Just like how you were saying when you spoke to him, like he very much does seem like that type of guy to where he's just going to be like the infectious guy along with being a super duper productive player.
And I also appreciate it too, just not to like just talk about his character a whole lot. Cause I know some people are just like, don't care about that stuff. Like genuinely like as evaluators, like people in the NBA that I've talked to are just like, I don't care. He can either play or he can't.
Okay.
I would also say that like he isn't a guy who like carries a lot of like pretense or BS with him. Like, it was not like, he doesn't tell his life story like it's this big dramatic, thing of like, and then my life changed forever. It's not like, I don't know, like, he's just kind of like a no BS, like upfront and honest guy. And I really appreciated that about him too. So I like the character. I like how hard he plays too. Like, I think that's another difference between him and, like, not that Isaiah Mobley doesn't play hard, but I think there's like a difference in level of assertiveness and like a want to dominate and impact the game.
Yeah.
That allows him to be more consistent.
It's clear too, like he's just super productive. He hustles. He's like the star player on his team, but plays like he's like the sixth man.
Yes.
Like, if that makes sense, like he plays like every possession could be his last one. Like, if we want to get super, emotional about it. But in all honesty though, like, if you look at the range that, I don't know where you have him, Maxwell, like
same range as you, late first or
late first, early second, like you're picking in that range, like who can I bring in that I can trust to come in and play a role and work hard, right?
Yeah.
With the potential to be like a rotational mainstay.
Yeah. And like, am I betting on something that could be valuable, or am I betting on something that, like, if I win, it's still a guy I can get on a minimum later? And if Yax hits, he's not going to be a guy you can get for a minimum. Like, I don't like the idea of drafting guys late first that I would not be able to, if it works out, I still wouldn't be able to trade them for a first round pick later, if that makes sense. Where it's like the value of the pick sort of like depreciates when you drive it off the lot. Like, am I drafting a guy who's going to hit an outcome where, like, they're just a fine, like, backup point guard, but then on the trade market that isn't worth anything? They're sort of easy to get in free agency. Or am I, like, winning late in the first round by getting a guy like Yax, where if it hits, it's like that guy's getting, like, above a minimum contract. Like, he's getting in that, like, $12 million a year range. And then that's something that isn't easy to come by, because you either need to have cap space or, like, be able to give up something real in a trade to acquire it. Like, that's what I like about him.
Yeah. I'm a believer in him. Like, there's I think it was Norn Rad in the chat was like, if you like CMB at 6, where do you have Yax? Well, much like CMB, Yax just produces, like, in a number of different areas. And I think, one of the best things about a role player in the NBA was, like, at some point they were the man, right? So Yax can go in and step into a role because he knows what he needs at UAB. He can go into the pros and be like, okay, this was like, let's just say Paolo Banchero. Like, if he goes and plays with the Magic, he's like, okay, Paolo is the guy. I know how to feed the guy because I needed that when I was at UAB. Like, I think that he's going to be able to glean from his own experience and be able to be productive in a lot of different areas, like defensively, rebounding, screen setting. And then ultimately, like, if he hits, a reliable spot up shooter.
Yeah. Yeah. Number is kind of similar to Kelly Olynyk. Another name that similar kind of positional proposition.
There you go. That would be like in the, kind of high end outcome. Like, a lot of teams want a Kelly Olynyk. Like, even at his age now, like, people love getting Kelly Olynyk on their team.
Yep. So we're going to take one more quick break and get into the Sicko prospects. So stay with us. Boy, did we pick a good week to talk about Curtis Jones.
Yes, we did.
Curtis Jones is one of the guys I brought up because I've got a spreadsheet column that will be out tomorrow in addition to my normal column. I've been busting my tail over here. He is a guard, I guess.
Yes.
At Iowa State. I did a spreadsheet sleepers column based on players who hit, like, the overall, like, BPM, OBPM, DBPM thresholds of, like, here's what an average NBA player looks like at this position, and these guys check all 3 boxes, which isn't as common as you'd think. Like, there are not a lot of guys that do that on a year-by-year basis. Usually guys are more tilted to one end of the floor. These guys, at least statistically, seem to lend themselves to two-way production. Curtis Jones is averaging 18.6 points per game. For Iowa State, one of the best teams in the country, 46.7% from the field, 40.3% from 3 on 7.1 attempts per game, 82.8% at the free throw line, 4.6 rebounds per game, 2.4 assists to 1.2 turnovers, and also averages 1.4 steals, 0.2 blocks. Jones is a funky player, man. He's a just microwave scorer with like the nastiest, slickest, like decel, pull up, like tough shot maker kind of game, but also like real deal range from 3, can run a ball screen really well, make the simple decision out of it really well. But really just a scorer first and foremost. I think the defensive stuff I'm like a little bit more skeptical of. Like I don't really love his lateral first step, but he does sort of know where to be. He has good hands, like really good in terms of being in tune rotationally and like knowing how to jump passing lanes. He's just a really interesting player. Super, super good scorer, good enough passer, competes hard, like rebounds, does enough like little things that you need out of a guy sort of in that mold. I think what we're kind of shooting for here is like a Gary Harris, like Ty Jerome kind of outcome. As far as like, is this guy my point guard? I don't know. Is he like a 2? Maybe. I don't know. It just kind of depends on the lineup. And maybe if we've got some size around him, this can really work.
Little like Cole Anthony type thing.
Yeah. I think a little more tilted toward the 2. But like that's sort of where I see Curtis Jones slotting in. I think he's probably a guy that's going to get a 2-way just because like you score that many points for one of the best teams in college basketball, play in front of NBA scouts a whole lot. Somebody's bound to like you. So yeah, I like Curtis Jones. I don't love him, but I think the fact that he keeps producing while being basically the focal point of the offense for such a great team, I don't know what more you can ask for.
The focal point for the offense of a team while also coming off of the bench. Like,
weirdly.
That's a weird thing is like this dude doesn't even start for his own team, but he could be the best player in the conference offensively, weirdly. It's very strange. Like he's like his team's version of Jamal Murray, it feels like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like good touch on floaters, good body control, solid handle, can be a bit of a chucker. Works his way into the lane, but doesn't like to draw contact. Feels kind of skinny, like especially for his age. Very reliable floor spacer. All right at pick and roll operation. Kind of like how you said, you kind of value him more as like a 2. I think that is okay. I think the passing is capped at like intermediate reads at best. He can throw lobs, can do the kickouts. And I just put defensively, like he has active hands, tends to make gambles. Is going to get screened a lot, kind of conservative, but the ball still kind of finds its way into his hands randomly at times. I like him in the range that you said, like the 2-way range. Like, I don't know if I'm drafting the guy. There is another guy on Iowa State that I am very much considering drafting in the second round, but it's probably not going to be him. But he is very fun. Like that 33-point outing that he just put up was just, it was a clinic. It was a shot making clinic, and teams are going to value that.
Yeah, and I think like ultimately a lot of like the athletic stuff and the strength stuff, like you mentioned, like I don't know, like a lot again, like just the separation at the next level, like how well is that going to carry over? And like he's already not a very downhill player, so like if he's getting bumped and having to like pick up the ball a lot, it's like that. It could be really tricky for him at the NBA level. But nevertheless, the guy I just thought deserved some spotlight from us. A guy that you wanted to bring up was Andrej Stojakovic. What are you seeing out of him? Because he's a guy that like I've had some I guess issues evaluating. Like I'm just kind of confused by him.
Yeah, I think a lot of my concerns about him was I wanted him to be more like his dad, and he is like pretty much like the exact opposite of his dad as a player, the great Peja Stojakovic. 6'7", 190, he's 20 years old, sophomore, played at Stanford last season, transferred over, is now playing in California. His first 14 games, he averaged almost 20 points per game, over 4 boards, 1.5 assists, 1.2 blocks, and 0.7 steals. Had shooting splits of 46, 37, and 83. His last 4, 16 points per game, 4 boards, 2 assists, less than a block, just over a steal, splits of 37, 8% from 3, and 82% from the free throw line. So he is kind of a middling 3-point shooter, but what I really like about him is that he has a pretty decent handle. He's fairly strong, especially for like his height weight kind of listing that he has. He plays much stronger. I like him in the mid-range. Like he can do some ball handling, work his way into the paint, moves really well away from the ball to include cutting, rebounds well, does a decent job of applying pressure. Like his free throw rate is actually pretty solid considering the role. Yeah, considering the role that he has. Has 20 blocks already on the season as a 3.5 block percentage, which is fun because I think that he shows fun, like rotational instincts, a decent help defender. I think that he shows some real good switching signs. I think that he'll fit a team defense really well, like once everything all fleshes out. I'm just interested in him because he's like a scorer who I think is like right on the precipice of being interesting if he can string together some like real consistent shooting. But I feel like the sophomore year compared to the freshman is much more enticing. And I feel like he is making a lot of strides in like many areas. And I think that he's just a guy to monitor kind of like A to B through the year.
Yeah.
As like a junior season, if he stays at Cal, I think that he could be like one of my early favorites. He's just had like a fun, interesting season, and I wanted to get your thoughts and kind of see what your overall perception of him has been. He's also been injured and not been playing a lot recently too, so he's kind of fading out of a lot of conversations, which is why I wanted to look at him because I want to remember what he looked like prior to injury, and that way when he comes back, I kind of have like a more sound like recall on what his game was.
Yeah, it's so weird. It is such a weird game. He gets inside a lot, and like he has like a good handle that he's able to like keep tight in traffic. He's really good at drawing free throws. He's like not a particularly good finisher or shooter. And I actually think he's like a low-key kind of like bad decision maker as a passer. Like doesn't.
I like his passing.
I like
his passing.
So he makes good passes occasionally. I feel like he just does not look to do it very often. Like I think a lot of time it's just like time to go to the free throw line and like he goes inside the arc. He is a bizarre. I feel like I've never been more confused on my evaluation of someone as an athlete than him because like he looks scrawny and then like you mentioned like there's plays where like he plays really strong and then like he's got this bizarre vertical pop where like
he's very wiry.
He'll like be like pretty far away from the basket and it's like all right, what's going on here? And then like all of a sudden he just dunks or like he'll like fly off the floor to swat something and it's like I didn't like you don't look like you can do that. Like just really an odd player. I'm very baffled by Stojakovic. To your point, I think if like he was a knockdown shooter, or even if I trusted the decision making a little bit, I think
he's shown stretches of really good shooting though. Like 14 games like this year out of I think 18, he was shooting like 37-38%. Like there's signs of shooting there. It's in there. I'm ready for it. It needs to be more consistent. Like
and I don't like in the release is inconsistent. Like he doesn't always follow through with it. And then like
it could be a little bit weird of a shot
too. I felt like he was very like right hand reliant on the inside too, which like sort of limits him as a finisher. So those are like my gripes with him. But yeah, like at the end of the day, he's wildly productive. And like his best games are against like good teams too. Like he's one of those guys who's like a higher BPM in the games against really good teams and the bad teams. So I don't know. We'll monitor him. Like I'm interested. I just don't know what it is.
Monitor.
That's
a finger on the pulse. Yeah.
100%. We'll keep it. Oh, I can't believe I'm going to say it. I guess keep it in they're ACC. I was going to say keep it in the Big Ten, but I guess West Coast schools that play in conference, not on the West Coast anymore. St. Thomas at USC was a guy who I really liked coming into the year. I had him like late first, early second range. Came out of the gates and just was not scoring the ball. And I was like, all right, get out of here. Tuned back in and oh my gosh, like, put him back on the radar, get him right back in that same range. So USC is like a weird mess this year. Like they are a team comprised of guys that were all different places last year and are now on one team. I would anticipate that's probably a big part of the reason that he was sort of inconsistent coming out of the gate.
Can I give you like a stat?
Give the stat. Maxwell? The stat, yes.
Yeah, so USC has 8 players on their team this season that had usage percentages of at least 17 last year. 6 of those 8 were over 20% on their usage percentage on their respective teams last year. This year, bringing in all those players, USC has 6 players that are over 17%, only 2 that are over 20% on their usage rate. And Thomas is not one of them. He just missed it. He's at 19.9, but he is like, talk about a team trying to find their identity.
Yeah, you go from a lot of guys being the chef to now having to wait to be served, basically. And like, in the comment too, they have no size. Yeah, this is not like, I think Josh Cohen is like their big man for the most part.
Yeah, he's kind of who was supposed to play for Arkansas but left with Musselman whenever he went to USC.
Yeah. So like a weird team where it's like short, not a lot of shooting, a lot of guys that are used to being the man and just trying to figure it all out. Thomas is the one guy who's figuring it out. So since conference play started, his shooting splits have improved dramatically. Up to 54.4% from the field in conference play, just under 36% from 3. And like, this is a guy that the whole thing with him was always just like, okay, well, he had this killer year at Northern Colorado where he did everything. Like, how's he going to score it when he goes up level? Well, now he's scoring it enough to be worth a bet in that range, in my opinion. Pro frame, it's 6'7", long arms, pro athlete, rebounds, really good decision maker, very impactful defender. The question was always just like, well, is he going to get to a point where he can shoot it? Had a really funky first 2 years at Loyola where like he just like didn't play at all. There is still developmental runway here that most older guys aren't going to have. So if I can take the guy that's like a shooting bet that we've seen thrive on high usage in the past, be able to do literally everything else on the basketball court, it's just a question of like, can we get the shot in a good enough place? Like, I love this bet. Like, I was like sort of fading on him because he had that really slow start to the year. But since then, like, he's the one guy in the scene where it feels like, okay, like he has figured out what he is and how to impact the game. Pulling the numbers over the last 10 games right now.
I got some splits I can run you real quick, Maxwell. So his previous 13 games that he had, right? Like, I'll call it the first 13 games like that he had. 10 points per game, 6 boards, 4.5 assists, 1.5 steals. So still wildly productive.
Yeah.
But his splits were 43, 32, 65. His last 6 games, who were against Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Nebraska, he's averaged 14 points per game, 6 boards, over 3 assists, 1.2 steals with splits of 56, 37, and 64.
That's what we're talking about. Like, he's the one guy on the scene that I think has definitely figured it out. I think given the versatility and number of ways he has to impact the game, like, this is a guy you bet on in that range. So yeah, that's all I had on him. Let's get to the guy that you brought up, because like, we both had a blast watching this guy.
Yes.
Somebody who's like a longer term guy that nobody's really talking about. Let's get into him. Who's your guy?
Yeah, Jamichael Stillwell for Milwaukee. He's a forward, junior, 6'8", 225. Is going to be 22. Like, should he come out and play NBA basketball this year? JUCO guy, transfers up to play at Milwaukee. And Maxwell, when I was texting you about Jamichael, first off, I was just kind of doing some analytic surfing, and I found his name because I'm like, okay, he can kind of shoot, rebounds the heck out of the ball. I want to check this guy out. And normally when I see the metrics on Jamichael that I see, I was like, oh no, like, this dude is going to be like a 6'8" center who can't move, right? Like, he's just not going to be a fluid athlete. But I turn on the tape, and like, first clip I see, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is actually like a legit sleeper. And then I'm like chilling one day at my house, and then you text me and you're like, Jamichael Stillwell is good. I was like, yes, I agree. I'm like, what did you think of the movement? And you're like, he moves like a 3-4, not like a college 5. And that's the key, right? Like, when you rebound the way that he does, when you play defense the way that he does, and you can kind of shoot a little bit, but you move like an athletic forward, that's a huge step, man. Like, I'm a big fan. I don't know. I don't want to put a ceiling, because we're no ceilings. I don't want to put a ceiling on him this year, but this is like a guy that you put in your toolbox for next year. Yeah. Like, if you want to be smart and like analytical, or like draft analyst circles, put Michael Stillwell in your back pocket for next year. But he's wildly productive right now at Milwaukee, like hilariously productive.
Yeah. Yeah. So the averages for Stillwell, he is 6'8", 13.9 points per game, 11.2 rebounds per game, 0.9 assists to 2.2 turnovers, 0.9 steals, 0.4 blocks per game, 49.8% from the field, 37.8% from three, 53.6% at the free throw line. Yeah, when I saw his stats, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to look because like he's averaging like a double-double in the Horizon League. And like Milwaukee's like usually like a well-coached team, like guys that are pretty interesting there for the most part. They had success with BJ Freeman is like a JUCO up transfer who's now at Arizona State. Like, all right, I'll take a look. Like, there's enough here. And like, yeah, to your point, like I was like so worried that these numbers screamed like mid-major center that can't move or jump. And yeah, like I was thrilled that I turned it on. I'm like, oh yeah, he is like an athletic forward. He's flying all over the place. He's covering ground. He has like a real face-up game. He can drive and attack the basket. I thought his shot looked really good, which like I'm confused as to why the free throw numbers are what they are, because like the stroke when he's just like catching and shooting looks really good. And again, like he pairs that with a good first step, big, long attacking strides to the basket, knows how to get to the rim, really tough inside. You don't average 12 rebounds a game if you're not tough at the basket. He's tough there. And then defensively, like really easy for him to switch, covers ground really well. It's going to be a refinement process for him, I think. Like the free throw numbers have to get up. He's got to see the floor a little bit better.
His defensive footwork's got to get better. Like he's got choppy steps. Play like big defensive plays have come against like their lower competition. He can be really, a little too handsy.
Yeah.
Like out of position sometimes in the help side. Like this is not when we're saying sleeper, like emphasis on sleeper, but
yeah,
there's a lot of production there to where like the things that need to be cleaned up, I don't think are going to be so wildly out of the question that he can't get there, on top of being like a rebounding 3-point shooting 3-4 someday in the NBA. Yeah, like he reminds me a lot of Chris Copeland, who used to play for the Knicks, you know, like kind of moves and plays like him.
Yeah, he's everywhere. And like, yeah, it's all, like I said, it's like refinement and like be a little bit less jumpy and reactive defensively so you don't get beat by guys that you shouldn't. Like slow down a little bit when you're attacking the basket, make your free throws. Like if he does that stuff, like he could very well like be in the mix a year from now. But yeah, really, really good shout on just like a fun, funky, productive player. What do you have in the works for NoCeilingsNBA.com this week?
We have a big week for NoCeilingsNBA.com this week, by the way. I think we got a roundtable coming up this year where everybody's going to talk about like where they feel about different prospects. We got big boards submissions coming due soon. But for myself individually, I just put up scouting notes last week on top of the Collin Murray-Boyles piece, and I included some sleeper prospects who play for Jacksonville University and the University of North Florida. I give you 5 sleeper prospects in there for free. Really good, fun prospects are in there. But this week, I'm taking a step out of the draft Sickos shadows, and I'm taking on one of the more, I would say, well-known prospects, Cooper Flagg.
Okay, so I've heard of him.
Yeah, plays for Duke.
Where do you have him on your board?
I think he's in a range where he could be the best prospect in the board to maybe one of the best players in the NBA whenever he comes up. And so I'm talking about that in this piece where I'm going to be not only just talking about like the great things that he's done this year, but like how he stacks up to number 1 picks of draft classes past. And it's been a super fun project so far. There's going to be graphs, there's going to be film, there's going to be analytics. Like there's something in there for everyone to be happy about, talking about probably the best prospect I think we can squash it now, Maxwell. Like he is definitively like the best player in this class. I think that he's planted that flag.
Yep. Yeah. He's my number 1 as well. I've got the big Yaks article coming out tomorrow. Go into a lot of depth there, just sort of on the nitty gritty of his improvement areas and what's changed and how. Compared to the last year and why that has me so excited about his game compared to other older prospects. I've also got spreadsheet sleepers. So in that article, like I mentioned, it's going to be the dual side BPM production guys. It's going to be Curtis Jones, Zach Hicks, a guy that I Love that I sort of like forgot about because it wasn't there for a couple of years, and now it might actually be there. And then Vlad Golden at Michigan, who I think is like Danny Wolf is being that rising tide that's sort of lifting these other prospects. And I think Golden's the guy who's really interesting. Here's please cover Adrian Woolley. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to ask you to stop talking about Adrian Woolley so that I can do him for No Stone Unturned this offseason. Because if he ends up on big boards, that's one less guy I'm really confident in that I won't be able to cover. So
Pride of Kennesaw State. I just watched him. I just watched him recently. Big fan, dude.
He's so good.
He's so big fan. He's yeah. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Check those out. Those will both be out tomorrow. So that's in the mix. Make sure you are following us, Stephen G Hoops on Blue Sky and XC Everything app, Bound Boards on Blue Sky and XC Everything app. No Sings NBA on all of our handles. Like, subscribe, do all those things.
If you're on YouTube, like this,
yes,
share this, and follow and subscribe.
And send one of your friends an unsolicited text that's just a link to this podcast episode.
Yep.
Do that for us. We'd appreciate it.
We'll cover your charges that you get for
absolutely.
texting.
Yeah, if you were still on a plan where you get charged 50 cents per text, we'll pay it.
I'm really banking on nobody still having a plan.
Yeah. I'm gonna have some explaining to do to Rucker later. So that'll do it for this week's episode. We appreciate all of you, especially all the live folks that join us in the chat. It's so much fun to have your input throughout the show. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we'll be back again next week.
Much love, y'all.